fixing security vulnerabilities is not the core competency. It is not the primary function of a software engineer. A software engineer has platforms to build and features to make, and fixing bugs is a part of one's job.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO Compass: Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as other top CISOs and industry security leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Caroline Wong, Chief Security Officer at Cobalt.
So I really lucked out. I started my career in cybersecurity right out of college. I studied electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley, and then I went right into working as a security engineer at eBay. I ended up leading teams at eBay. And then after eBay, I went to work for Zynga. So these were very cool places to be working in cybersecurity. You know, we were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. And the rest has sort of been history. I focused the first half of my career on GRC, security policy, metrics, and the second half on application security, software security.
Well, those are two great companies. I know Zynga makes some great games, isn't it? Word with Friends, isn't that one of them?
So Farmville was like the one back in the day, although Words with Friends is one of my favorites. So actually, Zynga was one of the earliest adopters of Amazon AWS. And in 2009, Farmville launched, and in just a few weeks, the game went from 0 to 10 million daily active users. Just astronomical growth, and a very, very exciting place to be at the time.
Wow, and I use eBay all the time, and it's great that you are working there, keeping eBay secure. So you led the metrics function for the team at eBay. Tell us about that. And what your experience was. You were talking about that you were, finding these security vulnerabilities through lots of different techniques, but struggled to get the developers to prioritize and fix some of those issues.
Yeah, I think that fundamentally building secure software from the perspective of a security professional involves getting other people to do things. So security, we find ourselves at eBay, we found ourselves doing things like penetration testing, scanning. At the time, we were getting basically the equivalent of bug bounty reports from external security researchers. And so we accumulated this vulnerability data, and we were really struggling to partner and collaborate effectively with the development teams to get those problems fixed and addressed. And so our CISO at the time, Dave Cullinane, partnered with the VP of Product Engineering, James Baresi, and they both said, let's come up with a metric for web application security at eBay. And we decided to take a baseline and say, such and such date, how many vulnerabilities do we have on the customer-facing websites? And we put together a goal to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities by 20%. And this was exciting because this was something that both the security and the engineering teams could partner together and make happen. And it took both of those teams working together to make it happen. Now, the number 20% 20% for security people is not an exciting number. Security people like a number like 100 or 99.5. Security people, in my experience, on the whole, tend to be perfectionists and tend to want everything to be perfect, but one of the things that we realized was that previous to making this agreement with the software engineering teams, it just wasn't working. And so what we did was we had the leaders at the top talk to each other and say, okay, we need to come up with a shared goal. And then we had the folks doing the work have conversations. We said to the software engineers, realistically, how much can you do? And we came up with 20%. And every month we measured and we reported and we did it. And it was a big deal. It was really, really exciting for us. From my perspective, I think security metrics are really about driving change, answering questions, and making decisions. And this was a cool opportunity to make some change in a measurable way.
I remember working on a conference years ago, and Dave was, we had a conference, so we were building it with 3 different tracks. It was an ISACA conference, and we had mobile security and cloud security, and then we had another track. And I remember him talking about, this was like early adoption days into the cloud. A lot of people weren't didn't really know what to do. So you were really at the forefront of that.
Absolutely. I mean, Dave Cullinane is an innovator in the space, a leader. I was so fortunate to work with Dave and to learn from him. When I published my book on security metrics in 2011, that book is actually dedicated to Dave.
Very nice. And so when you approach the security people with this 20% remark, did some of them look at that and say, well, okay, that's great, but at that rate, it's going to take us 5 years, and we're talking about internet-facing technologies that are at risk here. Did you get people that said that this is way too much risk to accept?
Yes. Yes, of course. And what we talked about was, while at any given moment, we have infinite paths before us, and we might think that there is a possibility to do better. But if we narrow down those lists of possibilities to the ones that are probable and the ones that are likely, and we also compare that to what's happened in the past, because what happened before was not that we were able to remediate 100% of vulnerabilities. What happened before was we would approach the engineering teams with these piles of vulnerabilities, and we would be ignored. We would be rejected. We would be met with an awful lot of resistance. And this is not because software engineers don't want to write secure software. It's not because they don't want to fix security problems. It's because we were not necessarily doing a great job of prioritizing appropriately. Because fixing security vulnerabilities is not the core competency. It is not the primary function of a software engineer. A software engineer has platforms to build and features to make, and fixing bugs is a part of one's job. But what we were really trying to do was to go from not a lot up to 20%, and to really change the behavior between the teams from emails getting ignored, meetings not being attended, vulnerabilities not getting fixed, to a state where we were starting to do that together. And I think there's a lot to be said for the approach of crawl, walk, run. As a parent of young children, the analogy is particularly sharp in my mind. I would never expect an infant child to run before they crawled or they walked. And that was truly the situation that we were in at the time. And it gave us an opportunity to really build that foundation so that we could go from there. But the appropriate comparison to make, actually, which we had to kind of contextualize, was the 0 to 20, not the 100 to 20.
It reminds me of that Couch to 5K program where they start off with you run for 30 seconds and then you walk for 30 seconds and then you do it for a minute and then you keep increasing until you find yourself you're running most of the time over that period of time. I saw one of the things that I really liked that you said that is that you changed the bonus program in how the developers were being incented. How difficult was that to get that changed?
That was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That was difficult in the sense that there's key stakeholders to engage, and what a person gets evaluated on as far as their performance goes in the workplace and how that is tied to their compensation. That is a really valuable tool that you can use to motivate people, to incentivize people, to drive the behavior and the actions that you want to see. But you've got to get folks on board. You've got to get management on board. You've got to get HR on board. One of the things that really worked in our favor was that the company had a structure for performance evaluation. A lot of this stuff was in a very structured process. We used whatever software, Workday, I believe, at the time. And so the structure was set up. The question had to do with the content of the performance evaluation, because of all the different things that you're going to evaluate about a person's performance, for something to be tied to remediation of security vulnerabilities and all of us together getting to this 20%, that was a big deal. And that was really exciting for us. I think at the end of the day, it is a relatively straightforward way to drive human behavior if monetary compensation is involved. But that was certainly something that was not easy and is not always possible, because you're not always going to get that buy-in from the leaders of these teams who are going to be trying to drive performance in whatever direction they deem to be appropriate.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. Well, and the other thing that you wrote for the CISO Compass book article is that you said that you also asked the developers how much work effort would it be to fix these security issues, and I really like that, because instead of putting these security issues on top of the other work that they need to do, that a good manager could actually plan in to say, you have to spend this much time on fixing security issues, and that's part of your job. It's not just building these new platforms, new functionality.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, it's really the pragmatic thing to do. My husband and I, we moved to where we live now a few years ago. And over the past few years, we've done a number of changes to our home and to our property. And what happens is we've actually managed to find a really great contractor to work with. And when we want something changed, we go to them and we ask, what's involved? Because I am not the subject matter expert in terms of how to, build the foundation for an outdoor pavilion. For me to say we've just got to do this without understanding first what's involved, how much time is it going to take, what are the various steps involved, what are the dependencies involved, how much is it going to cost, are the resources available? From my perspective, there is this very pragmatic, almost project management approach to getting it done, which says, have you identified all the things that need to happen in order to accomplish this goal? And then how can you approach it in such a way that you're gathering the information necessary to set it up for success? And that, I think, was actually really eye-opening for me, to realize that my job is not to tell other people what to do. It's not to demand other people to make code changes. It's actually to partner. It's actually to collaborate. It's actually to do my part, which is to present the information and to talk about what is my area of expertise, which is security vulnerabilities, the risk they pose, and then to be curious and to ask questions and to listen and to learn about the context for realistically, practically, how do we get these things fixed? Because the previous approach, it just doesn't get any of us anywhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the security officer doesn't necessarily have visibility into all the products that the software developer is working on and what the sequence of those are. And the developer may say, well, we're coming out with a new release of this product, in 4 months. It'd be better if we move those over here and we work on these other, vulnerabilities now.
Absolutely. And a place where I saw that happen, this was so kind of fun to observe, actually, at Zynga, because that actually happened. we would, like all the security teams in the world, keep track of the vulnerabilities. What's the count? What are the types at a place like Zynga? What games are they associated with? And then one week you just see a bunch disappear. And I was like, what happened? Did the engineering team decide to not make any new features this week and just fix security vulnerabilities? No, they changed the entire architecture of the platform. And in doing so, eliminated all of these security vulnerabilities. Sometimes it happens that way, and so it's certainly, I believe it's certainly to our advantage as security practitioners to be curious about and open to receiving that context so that we can really work within the system and not against it.
You've clearly had a lot of experience standing up metrics programs and, writing about it and so forth. The question that you always seem to get are, what are those key metrics that, that an organization should be tracking that they're going to make the biggest difference in their security program?
So I have been thinking about this question for a decade, more than a decade, and my thinking on it has changed. I used to think that there was a list of things that you should capture, and I actually don't believe that anymore. I actually don't think there is a list of things. I actually think that the correct approach, the best approach that I know about, is actually to define what I call risk management objectives. This is a philosophy that Sammy Miguez and I developed together when we were at Cigital leading BSIM assessments. So I also happen to have a LinkedIn learning course where I talk about this methodology in greater detail than we'll have time to discuss it here on today's podcast. I have a way to make that course available to the listeners of this podcast at no cost. So Todd, I'll be following up with you on that if anyone wants to learn more about it. But the short version is, You identify a risk management objective, you figure out a plan to achieve that objective and a cost, and then you make it happen. And the security metrics have to do with the identification of the plan, measuring progress against that plan, and measuring results. So I'll give you a couple examples of risk management objectives. One of them is, say, for example, Todd, that you're an executive at a company and I'm the security leader. And I approach you, and what I want to have a conversation about is I want to talk to you about risk tolerance. But it may not be the most productive approach if I say to you, Todd, what is our company's risk tolerance on a scale of 1 to 10? What do you think? That's one way to go about it, but I don't actually think it's the most effective way. I think that a more effective way might be for me to approach you and say, hey, Todd, do you agree that we should prevent the same cybersecurity defects from occurring over and over again? And probably you're going to say, yeah, Caroline, I think we should do that. And if I say to you, Todd, I think that we should reduce the probability that attackers can cause our critical applications to stop functioning. You're probably going to say to me, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Or, hey, Todd, I think we should require fixes for bugs for which well-known attacks exist. These are things that they are general enough, they are broad enough, they are fundamental enough that a security leader can have this conversation with a company executive and get on the same page about what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to accomplish together? And then once that common goal has been identified, a security leader can take that and put together a plan and make that plan happen, and measure progress against that plan. So it is a methodology that I go into further detail in this course that I mentioned, so perhaps it's not the expected answer. It's not, my answer is not, what's your ratio of incidents that have been detected internally versus externally? My answer is not, what's the percentage of your patches that were installed within SLA? Those are important things, but I think that the most important thing actually is to agree firstly on an objective and then to measure progress against achieving that objective.
I think that's an excellent way to look at it, and something that the executives, who is our main audience, can clearly relate to, because they're having to do that with other aspects of their business. This has been great, Caroline. It's wonderful to be able to catch up with you again and talk about metrics. It's such a very important area. Any other advice that you think our listeners, whether they're current CISOs, experienced CISOs, emerging CISOs, or security practitioners could benefit from?
I think that what I've learned over the past several years as a security leader is that I used to really want to understand all the ins and outs of the technical vulnerabilities. I used to think that was really important. And now, while I think that is important, something that I think is even more important is to actually understand the business that I'm trying to protect. If my job fundamentally as a security leader is to protect the value that's being created by the business, then it's critical for me to understand how that value is being created and maintained in the first place. And so I have developed a lot of curiosity about how businesses work and how organizations run. And I think that has made me a better security leader.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I think this has been very insightful.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Visit more CISO Stories podcasts on securityweekly.com, where you will find an index to prior episodes. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.